When people talk about Southeast Asia, everyone imagines a colorful and exciting life. Here, there are many different cultures, delicious street food, and a wide variety of entertainment options. In particular, food and leisure activities in this country are much cheaper than in European countries. What makes these countries even more attractive? And one of these countries is Vietnam, and there are dozens of good reasons to visit this country in Southeast Asia. Watch this video to feel it for yourself. Don't miss a single minute. Geographical location. First, let's take a general look at Vietnam, then discover more about street food, massage parlors, hair salons, and nightlife. And many other things as well. Vietnam is located in South Asia, and from above, it looks like a vertical map. To the north of the country is a world power, China, and the western border runs along Cambodia and Laos. The eastern strip of the country has a long coastline. The capital of this beautiful country is China. It is the city of Hanoi, and the country's economy is mainly concentrated in this city. If you're planning to go to Vietnam, the most convenient way to get there is, of course, by plane. The air travel network in this country is also developed enough to meet the needs of tourists from all over the world. Full body massage parlor. So, what should you do after arriving in Vietnam? Let's take a look together. For example, one of the first places tourists visit in Vietnam is the Vietnamese massage parlors. Moreover, in these parlors, it's not just massages that are offered. If you want, you can even get a shave. This type of massage is called as Mora, and many people from around the world come to Vietnam specifically for this. Most of the people who want to get a massage are men. One of the main priorities during the massage is complete relaxation. If you're ticklish or don't like physical contact, these massage parlors might not be for you, because Vietnamese masseurs literally go over your whole body, from head to toe, massaging every part. For this, they use special oils and lotions. A massage session lasts about an hour, but you can book a shorter or longer session depending on your preferences. Massages in these parlors aren't very expensive. Although prices vary from one place to another, you can get a really good massage for $40 to $50. In other words, as soon as you speak up about the quality of service, it will improve in Vietnam. You can even choose who will give you the massage. Most of them are young and look very clean and well-groomed. If you want, you can ask for several people to massage you at the same time. In fact, very few people regret getting a massage in Vietnam. And they've taken this profession to a whole new level. The massage industry in Vietnam is truly developed, and for very little money, you can enjoy professional services that you won't find anywhere else in the world. That's why one of the places you absolutely have to visit in this country is the massage parlors. Nightlife in Vietnam. After a daytime massage in Vietnam, in the evening, you can head out to the square. Life in this country is buzzing 24/7, and the streets are packed with people, even at night. Although Thailand is the leader when it comes to nightlife, Vietnam isn't far behind. There are places to go pretty much on every corner, and the streets are bathed in shades of blue and purple. At the entrance of these places, it's mostly young women who try to catch your attention, sometimes even going so far as to stop you and start a conversation. Since Vietnam is an extremely densely populated country, with a population of about 90 to 100 million people, even if you're a regular, the venues will do everything they can to draw you in. In this respect, you could say they've created a positive image for the neighborhood, and they've succeeded, because inside these places, there's just as much crowd and excitement as there is outside. Going to a nightclub alone doesn't mean you're actually alone. You can go wherever you like. If you want to spend money, the entire entertainment industry on this street is ready to help you out. They also attract young women, who are beautiful and well-groomed. Of course, passers-by can hardly take their eyes off these young women, and will end up spending money, either directly or indirectly. A rich cuisine. Ask yourself if you ever go hungry in this country. In Vietnam, there are so many shops that you can just pick one at random to fill yourself up. No matter which one you choose, the offerings are generally similar. The main sources of food in the national cuisine are rice and noodles. There are many types of noodles. Some are dry, like pasta, while others are more like a soup. Some are served hot, others are eaten cold. For example, at breakfast, they eat a soup-like dish called pho. In reality, it also looks like noodles, but it would be more accurate to say that it's a mix of all these ingredients. It's their national dish. This dish is extremely nourishing. It contains rice, lots of vegetables, and chicken. If you ask whether the food is expensive, it entirely depends on your budget. In this country, you can find something to eat for $1 or for $10. The higher your food budget, the better the quality, taste, and presentation of the dishes will be. However, in Vietnam, there is street food, which is very well promoted abroad. In fact, street food in this country is so popular that it has become a real culture in Vietnam. Because people from faraway countries come here to discover dishes they're seeing for the first time in their lives. Simply watching the preparation of these dishes is just as interesting and captivating as tasting them. Because they prepare the food right in front of you, which brings immense pleasure. By the way, it's worth noting that their street food contains a lot of pork. If you're allergic to meat, make sure to ask in advance what kind of meat it is. The most obvious thing to say about the food is the abundance of ingredients in a single dish. Almost every dish contains lots of vegetables and is topped with meat. Although the huge portions are definitely worth the price, it can be hard at first to get used to such seemingly complex dishes. Gender imbalance. As you walk through the streets of Vietnam, you might notice that there are more women than men out and about. According to statistics, out of the country's 97 million people, 51 million are women. Here, women work less often in heavy industries like manufacturing, and most often work in the service and entertainment sectors. As a result, women make up the majority in this sector, from street food vendors to those working in establishments. The good news is that most Vietnamese people take care of themselves and are very attractive. Saigon is a vibrant and energetic city. It's the largest city in Vietnam and is located in the south of the country. In other words, if you start your trip to Vietnam in Hanoi, in the north, you'll need to travel within the country to reach the festive atmosphere of Saigon. Moreover, Vietnamese people are incredibly warm. You could say they act this way because of their personality or because they see you as a potential customer. But when they realize you're a foreigner, their body language becomes extremely positive. This little detail matters to me. It helps keep the country's energy level high. Also, all Southeast Asians are open and warm people. They don't like being alone or closed off. For them, life happens out on the street, and they only go home to sleep. That's why, if you travel to countries like Vietnam or Thailand, you'll never get bored as long as you have a budget. Wherever you look in the world, the locals' eyes will always be drawn to you and they'll want to befriend you. The history of Vietnam. Before getting into the details about the country, let's talk about how Vietnam became Vietnam. The history of Vietnam is, in general, a story of war, colonization, and rebellion. To such an extent that, throughout its history, Vietnam was constantly occupied and colonized by China. It was also constantly attacked by Mongolia, the Netherlands, France, and the United States. France and China colonized Vietnam to such a degree that they practically imposed their culture on it. Today, Vietnam's social and traditional way of life closely resembles that of China, and you'll find many French dishes on Vietnamese tables. The Vietnam War, which the Vietnamese call the American War, was the most painful ordeal for the country. The north and south of Vietnam, which were then part of the Vietnamese region, had trouble unifying, and this situation led to war. At that time, the United States and the Soviet Union, known as the two world superpowers, also entered the war. Each chose their own side. The United States supported South Vietnam because they did not want the Soviet Union to dominate the world, while the Soviet Union sided with North Vietnam. Because North Vietnam was led by a communist regime, and unification could have led to the spread of communism. It was precisely for this reason that the United States pushed South Vietnam to take action and started the war. In the end, North Vietnam claimed victory, and in 1976, North and South Vietnam were unified into a single state. This 21-year war was also one of the most catastrophic moments in United States history. The Americans lost 58,000 soldiers in this war, and these repercussions were even more resounding than the Vietnam War itself. Today, Vietnam is a socialist republic. The country is governed by a single party, and the dominant ideology is communism. The country is divided into 5 regions and 58 provinces, and its capital is the city of Hanoi. A stunning natural landscape. On top of all that, Vietnam is not just a country shaped by people, it's also a land blessed with magnificent nature, independent of human influence. If you like, once you're there, you can take a boat trip in Ha Long Bay. The name means the place where the dragon descended to Earth. Day trips or overnight excursions to the bay depart from Hanoi. Another iconic symbol of Vietnam is its famous rice paddies. These fields provide a high yield, which helps meet the country's food needs. Besides being fertile, these fields are also incredibly beautiful. Visually, these fields are located in the northern regions of the country and are considered to be close to the border with China. If you get the chance, don't leave Vietnam without taking in the rich natural beauty of this region. Perhaps the most amazing place to visit in Vietnam is a spot in the desert called Mui Na. You're not dreaming, folks, this is a Southeast Asian country, and yes, there's a desert here. In fact, it's a fishing village, but the soil structure here is just like that of the African deserts. That's exactly why this fishing village has become a popular spot for tourists in Vietnam. Since Vietnam is a coastal country, most of its cities benefit from the sea air. In other words, one side of the country is covered with lush, green mountains, while the other is washed by the South China Sea. In addition to the fact that 40% of the country's territory consists of fertile, still unexplored land, the average monthly income per capita is between $150 and $200. It's a country with an income level below the average. In short, Vietnam is a country for those who want to have a great vacation on a budget. To speak in concrete numbers, the minimum wage in this country is only $327. You might think that the average income of the population is also around $400. In a country where the minimum wage is this low, things like food, housing, and entertainment don't cost very much. In Vietnam, with a budget of $1,000, you can have an excellent vacation. There are even quite a few people who travel there. People fall in love with Vietnam and end up getting married there. In particular, Vietnamese women are quite open to foreign men. There have been many Vietnamese women who have married foreigners, like Koreans, Spaniards, Portuguese, and Russians. If you marry someone in Vietnam, you can apply for a residence permit and fully settle down in Vietnam. All you have to do is marry someone there and submit a residence permit application at the consulate. The lack of sidewalks. To get back to our main topic, the most unpleasant thing about these busy streets is the lack of sidewalks, even in the most crowded places in the country. In fact, in this country, motorbikes can go anywhere and they don't allow you to get around comfortably, even in the narrowest alleys. In other words, you shouldn't be lured in by the bright lights and wander these streets alone. You always have to stay alert and listen for the sound of motorbike horns. Daily life in Vietnam. Vietnam is, of course, popular not just because of its massage parlors and nightclubs. First of all, if we're talking about the pace of daily life in Vietnam, it starts very early, around 5 a.m. When you step outside onto the street, you'll see life coming alive on the sidewalks. Right on the sidewalks, there are restaurants, and on almost every street corner, there's a typical local cafe where you can have breakfast and a coffee. Given that the country has such a large population, being able to get around quickly after work is absolutely essential for survival. In this country, women, in particular, are everywhere and in every place. From age 7 to 70, they do every kind of work imaginable. Everyone owns a motorbike. In fact, each person has their own motorbike. Up to 6 million motorbikes are actively on the roads in this country. Because there are so many vehicles, it's hard to follow the rules of the road in the streets of Vietnam, to the point where they pretty much don't exist. However, that doesn't mean the roads are in total chaos. There's actually a surprising sense of harmony in the streets. People don't bump into each other, and they're used to how everyone moves within the flow. Because incomes are low, people get around by motorbike. Moms and dads get up early in the morning to take their kids to school on a motorbike, sometimes 3 or even 5 people on the same bike, then head off to work. The biggest problem with motorbikes is that most thefts in the country are committed using them. In places that are very popular with tourists, thieves on motorbikes can snatch your bag and take off. Other than that, Vietnam is an extremely safe country. There is no conflict in the country. As for their character, Vietnamese people have a lot of self-respect. They are a proud people who have fought for many years against imperialism and war. They are a people who have stood firm, no matter what. As I already mentioned, Vietnamese people are known for their tolerance and hospitality. Transportation options. Also, domestic flights in this country are quite cheap and allow people to get around quickly. Of course, if you're traveling long distances, it's possible to get from one region to another by bus. In addition, within the cities, people get around using the bus network. There's also another situation. National driver's licenses are not accepted in Vietnam. To rent a car in this country, you have to hire a driver. In other words, as a tourist, you can't rent a car and drive it yourself in Vietnam. Although the railway network is not yet developed, it's the most comfortable means of transportation in Vietnam. Of course, that's why it's more expensive than a bus, but it's an experience you have to try before you die. If I had to find a metaphor to describe Vietnam, I'd probably say it's like a phoenix rising from its ashes. Thanks to its ancient temples listed as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, its culture, its tombs, and its unique coastline, Vietnam is one of the best countries to visit before you die. Scams in souvenir shops. Moreover, there can be scams in souvenir shops. If you plan to buy something in Vietnam, I recommend visiting at least 5 shops. As soon as they realize you're a tourist, they might arbitrarily raise the prices. For example, traditional conical hats, traditional silk clothing, AO dye, and bamboo flutes attract a lot of attention from tourists as souvenirs. If you want to buy one of these items and bring it back with you, don't trust the Made in Vietnam labels. Because many counterfeits are sold as if they were silk, with a label bearing the original name, when in reality they're fakes. Or most of the big brand products like Nike and Adidas sold on the street are actually counterfeits. People walking around there think that the products sold at low prices, like water on the streets and in markets, are genuine because the factories of the world's biggest brands are in Vietnam. The seller claims they're authentic, but doesn't allow you to take photos. In my opinion, I advise you not to believe them. Also, when shopping in the streets of Vietnam, you'll feel cramped. The distance between houses is very small, and you'll constantly have to walk through narrow alleys. As you walk around Vietnam, you'll also notice that people in this country drink a lot of coconut water. In particular, tourists who have never tasted coconut water before will definitely want to try it when they come to Vietnam. Coconut water is turned into fruit juice with ice, sweetened milk, and fresh fruit, which is served to everyone. It is strongly advised not to drink tap water in this country. I recommend buying water at supermarkets in Vietnam and carrying it with you in your bag. Economically, Vietnam is an agricultural country. Vietnam's main economic resources are based on the cultivation of rice, coffee, and corn. Vietnam is one of the world's largest producers of coffee and rice. In addition, fishing and tourism are also sources of income for the country. Women in this country work in virtually every sector. You can see Vietnamese women working in the rice fields, in restaurants, and in industry. As for men, they often do work that requires physical strength. Since the country's main source of income is agriculture, and the Vietnamese can't reach the same level of agricultural technology as the Dutch, farm work often relies on physical strength. Cheap labor. To be honest, my friends, labor in this country is quite cheap. Workers put in long hours for $5 to $6 a day. That's why many world-famous brands in clothing and technology have lots of factories in Vietnam. In fact, cheap labor significantly lowers production costs. Factories aside, the country ranks 25th in the world for unique biodiversity. However, since the country's ecological life has suffered greatly from wildlife loss in the past, there's almost nothing left. In rural areas, you only come across snakes, crocodiles, and tigers. On top of that, diseases like malaria and dengue can be common in rural regions. However, there are no mandatory vaccinations in the country. Remember that in Tanzania, vaccines against diseases like malaria and hepatitis are mandatory. Time difference. If you want to travel to Vietnam, you can use direct flights or connecting flights offered by certain airlines. Don't forget about the time zone difference. The lack of a time difference will disrupt your work-life balance. If you're coming from neighboring countries like Cambodia or Laos and want to go to Vietnam, you can easily get there. By bus. Of course, the trip is very long and on average takes about 30 hours. Entering Vietnam. Of course, entering Vietnam isn't that simple. First, you need a visa. To get a Vietnamese visa, you'll need a confirmation letter called AC-1 certificate. That means a travel agency in Vietnam applies to the Vietnamese immigration office on your behalf and confirms that you are indeed traveling there for tourism purposes. The application must specify your entry and exit dates. In addition, you need to provide a hotel booking confirmation. If you go beyond the scope of your tourist purposes, the agent who submitted the application on your behalf will come under suspicion because the participating company signs a commitment to sponsor you. If you meet all the requirements and follow the procedures, your Vietnamese visa will be issued within 7 to 15 days. You do not have the option to extend the visa you obtained. You cannot apply for a tourist visa a second time within the same year. Over the past 3 years, the validity period of a tourist visa in this country has been 22 days. In other words, you cannot stay in Vietnam for more than 22 days, even if you want to. The climate in Vietnam. So, despite all these difficulties, you've still decided and you really want to go to Vietnam and explore its places. In that case, my advice is to go after October. I especially advise against going between May and September because this country has a tropical climate. You know, in Asia, it often rains very heavily. In summer, it's also very hot in Vietnam, and there are heavy rains. In other words, if you come to Vietnam during this period, you risk getting caught in the monsoon rains. Of course, that will significantly reduce the quality of your stay in Vietnam. Also, be careful, in summer, the temperature can reach 40 degrees. That's why it's essential to bring sunscreen with you. Transportation costs can turn out to be quite high. If you plan to go to Vietnam with the current rates, transportation costs can turn out to be quite high. During your stay, your average daily expenses will be around $40 to $50. Of course, it's possible to travel on $20 a day, but you will have to give up a lot of things. To have a good holiday, you need to spend $50 a day, folks. For example, in this country, the currency used is the Vietnamese dong, and $1 is worth about 24,000 dong. For example, the internet is essential, no matter which country you're traveling to. The price of a SIM card with 10 gigabytes of mobile data ranges from $8 to $10. If you're traveling by taxi, you can find a taxi. It's cheap through the Grab app. The average cost of a taxi ride through this app is $2 to $3. When it comes to food, if you're not a fan of Asian cuisine, you can probably buy instant noodles. At the market, they cost about $1. This means that if you don't go to a restaurant, you can buy a ready-made meal for $1 to $2. There are plenty of historical sites and temples in Vietnam. We also mentioned that there are many historical sites and temples in Vietnam. Unfortunately, there is an entrance fee for these places. Entry to most special areas costs at least $1. Prices at mid-range hotels start from $6 to $7 per person. Since the monthly income of a Vietnamese worker is often less than $200, Vietnam is quite a cheap country for a tourist earning in dollars. In short, friends, almost everything costs $1 in Vietnam. Also, since the country is located in a tropical climate, fruits like mango, dragon fruit, and pineapple can be bought at very low prices. However, imported products like apples and mandarins are very expensive here. In this country, breakfast culture is not very developed, so you might end up eating eggs and bread in the morning. If you're wondering whether there's a breakfast without cheese or olives, here's your answer. Vietnamese people eat very little cheese and olives. That's also worth mentioning. In addition to cultural tours in Vietnam, you might also want to try a massage. In previous videos, I mentioned that countries like Thailand and Indonesia are quite well known for their massage services and attract tourists. In Vietnam, a similar industry has developed, and if you wish, you can get a massage from local women. Massage parlors are everywhere on the streets of Vietnam. The average cost of such a massage is 150, that's in thousands of dong. In other words, you could say prices start at around $6 or $7. In short, whatever you do in Vietnam, the dollars in your pocket will gradually disappear, folks. Women who dress too provocatively are not well regarded. For example, in this country, certain moral rules are also observed. In Vietnam, it's not recommended to have overly intimate contact with the opposite sex in public places. Women who dress too provocatively are not well regarded. Women generally wear traditional clothing, no matter their age. Even in 40-degree heat, you won't see that. A lot of women and men in shorts. Moreover, women don't drink much alcohol in public places, always hold things with both hands, don't point at people with their finger, and don't wear shorts except when going to the beach. These are just a few of the important moral rules established by this country. Ethical principles. Since moral foundations are based on religious traditions, the country's religious temples are always crowded. I'd say that Vietnamese people live in harmony with religion. If you want to talk about religion and history, you can discuss them as much as you like. Of course, you need to have some knowledge to do so. Vietnamese. Most elderly people don't know any foreign language except Vietnamese. But young people and those of middle age speak fairly well French and English, since French culture is quite popular in the country. In regions connected to the Soviet bloc during the Cold War, you can even hear Russian spoken. Another moral code related to the country is that Vietnamese men find it unattractive when Asian women date men from other races, especially if such a situation happens in nightclubs. Under the influence of alcohol, Vietnamese people can become aggressive, which can lead to unpleasant incidents. Also, on the streets where the nightclubs are, you often come across pickpockets. Therefore, if you plan to go out at night to Vietnamese establishments, don't carry too much cash on you and put your wallet in a side pocket rather than your back pocket. Always keep your backpack in front of you. That way, you'll minimize the risk of theft. Every trip has its own value, which is why our exploration ends here. If you want to keep exploring countries like Russia, Uzbekistan, Finland, or smaller Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Laos, and Thailand, visit our channel and discover lots of interesting information about other countries. YouTube favors videos that get a lot of likes, so if you found this video interesting, please give it a click. Hit like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. This will help our channel grow and allow us to create even more interesting and captivating videos about different countries. And now, goodbye and see you soon in upcoming videos. A big thank you to you, and see you very soon.